She thought she found love again. She was wrong. Olivia Carter, a single mother, finally let her guard down for the charming, perfect Ryan Holloway. But behind his polished smile lurked something much darker. The signs were there. Her son, Ethan, saw them first. But by the time Olivia realized the truth, it was almost too late. One moment shattered everything. One decision changed their lives forever. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories. Olivia Carter never thought she would need love again. Love, in her experience, had been a cruel illusion, a promise that soured into something unrecognizable, leaving behind only wounds, some visible, others buried deep where no one could see. At 32, she had rebuilt her life from the ruins of a past she refused to let define her. She had her son, Ethan, her career in advertising, and a quiet apartment where laughter, not fear, filled the air. That was enough. Or so she told herself. Ethan was 10, sharp-eyed and observant, with a heart too kind for the world he had already seen too much of. He wasn't the kind of child to throw tantrums or demand attention. Instead, he watched. He absorbed. And sometimes, Olivia worried that he carried too much of her pain, tucked away inside his quiet little frame. He had nightmares he never spoke about, shadows of memories from a father who had once slammed doors and shattered glass, whose anger had filled the walls of their old house like poison. Olivia had left that man behind, left the bruises, the fear, the way she had learned to shrink herself to survive. She had promised Ethan, and herself, that their world would never again be shaped by the hands of a man who thought love meant control. So, when the invitation to the corporate networking gala arrived, she almost tossed it aside. She didn't do parties. She didn't do small talk over overpriced champagne, pretending to be dazzled by the success of people who never went home to a 10-year-old with a backpack full of book reports and a fridge covered in his latest sketches. But then her boss had pressed, insisting that it was an opportunity. Clients would be there, important faces, a chance to solidify the career she had worked so hard for. And so, with a sigh and a reluctant glance at her reflection, she had pulled on a navy dress and forced herself into heels she hadn't worn in years. The gala was just as she had expected, polished, expensive, and suffocating in its perfection. The art on the walls was abstract, cold in a way that made her long for the messy warmth of Ethan's drawings. She wandered the room, making polite conversation, checking her phone every so often as if Ethan might need her, though she knew he was safely at home with Lena, her best friend, the one person she trusted implicitly. She was halfway through considering an early exit when she heard a voice beside her. "Modern art," the man said, smooth, amused. A celebration of confusion. Olivia turned, her brows lifting slightly. The stranger was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that fit too well to be anything but expensive. His sandy blonde hair was neatly styled, his jawline sharp, and his blue eyes, piercing, calculating, locked onto hers with an intensity that was almost unsettling. He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made people lean in, that made them believe they were the only person in the room. "You don't sound like a fan," she replied, tilting her head. "Oh, I appreciate the effort," he admitted, the corners of his eyes crinkling slightly. "But I prefer things with heart, stories, meaning, something that makes you feel, not just look." There was something about him, charming without being overbearing, confident but not arrogant. He introduced himself as Ryan Holloway, an entrepreneur with a passion for philanthropy, though he never quite specified what, exactly, he did. The conversation flowed with an ease Olivia hadn't felt in years. He listened. When she mentioned Ethan, she braced for the usual shift. the almost imperceptible retreat that came when men realized she was a package deal. But Ryan surprised her. "What's he like?" he asked, genuinely curious. She hesitated before answering. "Smart, observant, a little too serious for his age, maybe. He loves to draw, reads everything he can get his hands on. He's my world." Ryan smiled, something warm flickering in his gaze. "He sounds incredible. You must be proud." "I am," she said, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the weight in her chest lighten just a little. By the end of the night, Ryan had asked to see her again, and against the instincts that had kept her heart locked away for years, Olivia said yes. Their first date was at a cozy Italian bistro, the kind with dim lighting and the rich scent of garlic and fresh basil curling through the air. Conversation came effortlessly. Ryan was charming, thoughtful, but never pushy. He asked about her dreams, her goals, not just about work, but about the things she wanted beyond survival. And, most surprisingly, he asked about Ethan. "She's a huge part of my life," Olivia said, her voice steady but guarded. "As she should be," Ryan replied easily. "I'd like to meet her when you feel it's right." It was a simple sentence, but it stuck with her. Most men she had dated, few as they were, had danced around the subject of her son, treating him as a hurdle rather than an extension of her. Ryan, however, seemed to accept it without hesitation. It made her uneasy, the way he said all the right things, but she couldn't pinpoint why. When Ethan finally met Ryan, it was on a Saturday afternoon at the park. Olivia had prepped him beforehand, keeping it casual. "Just a friend," she said, though the weight in her chest made it feel like a lie. Ryan arrived with an easy smile and a book one Olivia had mentioned was on Ethan's reading list. Ethan took it with polite hesitation, his small fingers brushing over the cover. "Thank you," he said softly. They spent the afternoon talking. Well, Ryan and Olivia did. Ethan mostly watched, speaking only when directly addressed. When they walked to their cars, Olivia sighed. "He's shy," she explained, though she wasn't sure why she felt the need to. Ryan chuckled. He's smart," he corrected. "He's watching, listening. I'd be the same way if someone new came into my mom's life." The words settled in her chest, comforting and disarming. Maybe, for once, she had met someone who understood. Weeks turned into months. Ryan became a steady presence. He brought small, thoughtful gifts for Ethan. An art set, a bookmark shaped like a dragon. Little things that proved he was paying attention. He never forced his way in, always waiting, always patient. Olivia told herself that Ethan's hesitation was just his nature. He had always been slow to trust. But what Olivia didn't see, what only the pages of Ethan's private journal held, was a single line, scrawled in neat, slanted handwriting. "He's nice to Mom, but when he looks at me, his smile stops at his eyes." Olivia had spent so many years believing that love was a distraction, an illusion wrapped in sweet words and fleeting promises, but Ryan Holloway was changing that. Slowly, steadily, he was proving that love could be something different. Patient, unwavering, kind. He had settled into her life so effortlessly that she could almost convince herself it had always been this way. The small things stood out the most. The way he showed up at her office with coffee just the way she liked it, without ever needing to ask. The way he listened when she vented about work, offering advice without making her feel small. The way he never hesitated to include Ethan in their conversations. asking about his favorite books, his art, his latest school projects. Ryan had become a fixture in their lives, present but never intrusive. It felt safe. The first time he was invited over for dinner, Olivia had been nervous. She had spent the entire day cleaning, making sure everything was perfect, even though she knew it didn't really matter. Ethan, ever perceptive, had noticed. "You really like him," he said that afternoon, looking up from his sketchpad as she wiped down the kitchen counters for the third time. Olivia hesitated before answering. "I do." Ethan studied her for a long moment, then looked down at his drawing. "Okay," he said simply. Ryan arrived that evening with a bottle of wine for Olivia and a leather-bound sketchbook for Ethan. It wasn't a grand gesture, just something small, thoughtful. But Olivia saw the way Ethan's fingers lingered on the cover, tracing the fine details of the embossed design. "Thank you," Ethan said politely. "You're welcome," Ryan replied, his tone warm but measured. "Your mom tells me you like to draw." Ethan only nodded, flipping the book open to inspect the pages. Olivia watched the exchange closely, searching for something she couldn't quite name. Dinner was pleasant, filled with laughter and easy conversation. Ryan was charming, asking Ethan about school, his favorite books, his art. Ethan answered, but Olivia noticed how his responses were shorter than usual, how his gaze flickered toward her before answering, as if searching for some unspoken reassurance. After dinner, Ethan excused himself to his room, leaving Olivia and Ryan alone in the quiet warmth of the kitchen. "He's a great kid," Ryan said, refilling her wine glass. Olivia agreed, smiling. "He's my whole world." Ryan reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "I can see that, and I want you to know. I don't take this lightly, Olivia. You and Ethan, you're a package deal. I respect that." The words settled into her like a quiet reassurance, something she hadn't realized she needed to hear. Over the next few weeks, Ryan continued to weave himself into their lives, one moment at a time. He showed up for Ethan's school art showcase, standing beside Olivia as they admired his work. He helped Olivia with errands, making life just a little easier, in ways that felt natural, effortless. He never pushed, never overstepped. But Ethan remained distant. Olivia wanted to believe it was just an adjustment period, that her son needed time to warm up to the idea of someone new. But there were little moments, subtle, almost imperceptible, that made her pause. Like the way Ethan seemed to shrink slightly whenever Ryan entered the room, the way he avoided looking at him directly for too long, the way his fingers fidgeted with his sleeves when Ryan spoke to him. One evening, as Olivia was tucking Ethan into bed, she noticed his sketchbook lying open beside him. She reached for it, smiling. "Can I see what you've been working on?" Ethan hesitated before nodding. She flipped through the pages, admiring his detailed pencil work. But then she paused. One drawing stood out from the rest. It was a sketch of a man in a suit, standing tall and imposing. His face was carefully shaded, detailed, eerily similar to Ryan. But what unsettled Olivia wasn't the resemblance, it was the expression. The man in the drawing was smiling, but his eyes were dark, empty. Olivia's throat tightened. "Ethan, is this Ryan?" Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. "Why does he look like that?" she asked, keeping her voice soft. Ethan shrugged, his fingers curling into the blanket. That's just how he looks sometimes. A chill ran down Olivia's spine, but she forced a smile. "You're a great artist, kiddo," she said, brushing his hair back. "Get some sleep, okay?" Ethan nodded, but as she turned off the light and closed the door behind her, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She told herself she was overthinking it, that Ethan was just slow to trust, that he just needed more time. Ryan had been nothing but wonderful. He had never raised his voice, never been anything less than patient. But later that night, when Olivia lay awake in bed, she couldn't stop seeing the drawing. The way Ryan's eyes had looked. Empty. Hollow. She didn't want to admit it, but something about it felt right. A few days later, Ryan invited them to spend the weekend at his lake house. Olivia hesitated at first. It felt like a big step, moving beyond casual dates and dinners to something more intimate, more permanent. But Ryan reassured her with that easy, confident smile. "It'll be fun," he promised. "Just the three of us. A little getaway." Ethan said nothing when Olivia told him. He simply nodded, setting his sketchbook aside and looking out the window. On the drive to the lake house, Olivia tried to engage Ethan in conversation, but he only offered short responses, his attention focused on the passing trees outside the window. Ryan, as always, was effortlessly smooth, filling the silence with stories of his childhood summers, painting the trip as something idyllic, something to be cherished. But when they arrived, Ethan's posture stiffened. The lake house was beautiful, all glass and cedar wood, overlooking a still, serene stretch of water. But there was something too perfect about it, something staged. The furniture was pristine, untouched. There were no personal photos, no warmth. Ethan stood at the entrance, his arms wrapped around himself as he looked around. "What do you think, buddy?" Ryan asked, placing a hand lightly on the boy's shoulder. Ethan flinched, so small, so quick that Olivia barely noticed. But she did notice. "Thank you," Ethan murmured, polite as always. Ryan smiled, but Olivia caught the flicker of something else behind his eyes before it was gone. Dinner was quiet, too quiet. Olivia tried to ignore the way Ethan barely ate, the way his shoulders were drawn tight, the way he kept his eyes on his plate. When he knocked over his water glass, his breath caught. He reached for a napkin quickly, his fingers trembling slightly. Ryan's voice cut through the air, calm but firm. "Careful, Ethan." It wasn't a yell. It wasn't even harsh. But something about the tone made the hair on Olivia's arm stand up. "It's just water," she said quickly, forcing a light laugh. "No harm done." Ryan smiled, easy, smooth. "Of course, just teaching a little mindfulness." He reached out, ruffling Ethan's curls. But Olivia saw it again, that subtle tensing of her son's shoulders, the way he held his breath. That night, long after dinner had ended, Ethan appeared at Olivia's bedroom door, his sketchbook clutched to his chest. "Mom," he whispered, "can I sleep here with you?" Olivia frowned. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Ethan hesitated. Then, finally, "The room's too big. It feels strange." Olivia's heart melted. She lifted the blanket, making space. "Of course, baby. Come here." Ethan climbed in beside her, curling against her the way he used to when he was younger. Olivia ran her fingers through his hair, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. As he drifted to sleep, she stared at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the wind outside. Something felt wrong. She just didn't know what. Not yet. The lake house was beautiful, almost too beautiful, as if it had been designed for a magazine spread rather than a home. Every corner was pristine, every surface polished to a shine. The windows overlooked the still lake, where the water reflected the fading light of dusk in shimmering waves. It should have felt peaceful. It should have felt like a fresh beginning, but Ethan never relaxed. Olivia watched him as he sat curled up on the leather couch, sketchpad in his lap, knees pulled up to his chest. His pencil scratched lightly against the page, but his eyes flicked up every few seconds, darting toward Ryan whenever he moved. She wanted to say something, to ask him if he was okay, but she already knew the answer. He wasn't. The moment replayed in her mind. How his body had tensed when Ryan had rested a hand on his shoulder. The way he had flinched at dinner when his glass tipped. Ryan hadn't done anything wrong. That's what Olivia kept telling herself. His voice hadn't been cruel, just firm. His touch hadn't been rough, just guiding. But still, Ethan had reacted like that. She tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just an adjustment period. New environment, new rules. Change was hard for kids. She forced herself to smile as she walked over to where Ryan was pouring 2 glasses of wine at the kitchen island. "Thank you for this," she said softly. Ryan looked up, smiling as he handed her a glass. "For what?" "For this weekend." "For trying." She glanced over at Ethan, who was still hunched over his sketch pad. "I know it's not easy for him." Ryan followed her gaze, his expression unreadable for a moment, before he smiled again. "It's okay. He'll come around." He took a sip of his wine, then added, "He just needs to learn how to fit into a family." Something about the way he said it made Olivia pause. Fit into a family. She swallowed the unease and forced a nod, choosing to believe he meant well. That night, as she climbed into bed, she expected to be alone. But just as she was about to turn off the lamp, there was a soft knock at the door. "Ethan." "Mom," he whispered, "can I sleep here with you?" She sat up immediately. "Of course, sweetheart. Come here." He climbed into the bed beside her, curling against her the way he used to when he was younger. She stroked his hair, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "You okay?" she murmured. Ethan hesitated, then, in a small voice, he said, "The house feels cold." Olivia frowned. "Cold?" Ethan nodded against her shoulder. "Like it's not real." She pulled the blankets over him and sighed. "It's just new, baby. We'll make it feel like home." Ethan didn't respond. He just clung to her a little tighter. The next morning he was back to his usual, quiet self, but Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Ryan made breakfast, flipping pancakes in the kitchen with the effortless ease of a man who had everything under control. Ethan sat at the table, poking at his food. "Eat up, bud," Ryan said cheerfully. "We've got a big day planned." Ethan didn't look up. "What are we doing?" Ryan grinned. "We're going hiking. There's a beautiful trail near the cliffs. You'll love it." Ethan's hand stilled on his fork. He finally lifted his gaze, but it wasn't excitement in his eyes. It was hesitation. Olivia saw it immediately. "You don't have to go if you don't want to, sweetheart." Ryan's expression flickered for a fraction of a second before smoothing back into a smile. "It'll be fun. He'll love it once we're out there." Something in his voice told Olivia this wasn't a suggestion. Ethan glanced at her, and she gave him a small nod. "It'll be okay." And so they went. The trail was steep, winding through dense trees before opening up to a breathtaking view of the lake below. Olivia was panting by the time they reached the top, but Ryan barely looked winded. Ethan stayed a few steps behind them, his sketch pad tucked under his arm, his eyes darting toward the edge of the cliffs every so often. At one point, Ryan put a hand on his shoulder. "Come on, sport, take a look." Ethan didn't move. Ryan sighed, shaking his head. "You've got to learn to stop being so timid. You're not a baby anymore." Olivia stiffened. "Ryan." He turned to her, eyebrows raised. "What?" "I'm just saying, he's 10. He should be able to handle a little adventure." Ethan's fingers curled into his sleeves. Olivia forced a smile, trying to ease the tension. "Let's just enjoy the view, okay?" Ryan didn't argue, but the mood had already shifted. When they got back to the house, Ethan disappeared into his room without a word. Ryan exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You baby him too much." Olivia blinked. "Excuse me?" "He's too soft, Olivia." Ryan leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing his arms. "You let him get away with everything. That's why he's always in his own little world." Olivia felt heat rise in her chest. "He's not soft. He's careful. He's smart." Ryan smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's what I mean. He's smart enough to know when he's being coddled." She stared at him for a long moment. "Are you saying I'm a bad parent?" Ryan's expression softened immediately. "Of course not. You're an amazing mother. I just think maybe it's time to start setting firmer boundaries. He needs structure." Olivia's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to nod. "I'll think about it." That night, as she tucked Ethan in, she noticed something. His sketch pad was open on his bed. She glanced at the newest drawing and felt a chill crawl up her spine. It was another sketch of Ryan, but this time his smile was twisted. His eyes were sharp, and behind him there was a small figure, Ethan, standing on the edge of a cliff. Her breath caught. "Ethan?" He looked up at her, his face blank. "Mom, do we have to live with him?" The question sliced through her like a knife. She swallowed hard. "Why do you ask?" Ethan hesitated, then said, I like it when it's just us." Her heart clenched. She brushed his hair back. "You'll always have me, sweetheart, no matter what." Ethan didn't say anything else. He just curled deeper into his blankets. Olivia stayed there for a long time after he fell asleep, staring at the drawing. The air in the room felt colder than before. Something was wrong. She just wasn't ready to admit it yet. The wedding preparations consumed Olivia's life. What had started as a small, intimate ceremony had spiraled into something grand, something orchestrated with a precision that made her feel like a guest at her own event. Ryan took charge of everything, coordinating vendors, selecting the venue, making sure every detail was perfect. At first, she had been grateful. Planning a wedding was overwhelming, and Ryan was nothing if not efficient. But there were moments, small ones, fleeting, that made something inside her hesitate. Like the way he dismissed her preferences. When she had suggested a cozy garden wedding with close friends and family, Ryan had laughed softly, shaking his head. "Come on, Olivia. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. We should go all out." And when she had hesitated, torn between what she wanted and what he insisted was better, he had simply taken her hand, his voice smooth as silk. "Trust me. I know what's best." Somewhere along the way, she had stopped arguing. Ethan had grown even quieter. He no longer lingered when Ryan was around, no longer sat at the dinner table without being prompted. He had always been reserved, but now there was something else. Distance. One evening, as Olivia sifted through a stack of wedding invitations, she noticed something. Lena's name wasn't on the guest list. She frowned, flipping through the pages again. Maybe it was a mistake? "Ryan," she called, setting the invitations aside. "Did we forget to add Lena to the list?" Ryan barely looked up from his laptop. "Hmm?" Lena," Olivia repeated, watching him closely. "She's not on the guest list." There was a pause, so brief she almost missed it. Then Ryan sighed, setting his laptop down. "I thought we agreed to keep it small." Olivia blinked. "Lena is my best friend." Ryan's expression was calm, measured. "I just didn't think she'd want to be there. She's been distant lately. She's never liked me, has she?" His tone was light, almost teasing, but Olivia felt the weight beneath his words. "She's protective," Olivia said carefully. "She just wants what's best for me." Ryan smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Of course. But don't you think she's been undermining us? Every time we talk about the future, she plants little doubts in your mind. I just don't want any negativity at our wedding." Something about the way he said "our wedding" made Olivia's stomach twist. She hesitated for a beat too long. Then, slowly, she nodded. Fine. The word tasted wrong in her mouth, but she swallowed it anyway. That night, Ethan knocked on her bedroom door again. "Mom?" She sat up, blinking away the exhaustion. "What is it, sweetheart?" Ethan stood there, his small frame silhouetted by the hallway light. "Do I have to do anything at the wedding?" Olivia frowned. "Like what?" "I don't know." He shifted on his feet. "Like be a ring bearer or something?" "No, baby," she said softly, patting the space beside her. "You just have to be there." Ethan climbed onto the bed, tucking his knees to his chest. "Good. I don't want it." The quiet finality of his words sent a chill through her. She wanted to ask him why, but something in his posture, the way his fingers twisted into the fabric of his pajama pants, made her hesitate. Instead, she reached out, smoothing his hair. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" Ethan nodded, but he didn't say anything else. And Olivia didn't push. A week before the wedding, the tension reached a breaking point. It was during the final dress fitting. Olivia stood before the full-length mirror, the ivory lace hugging her figure perfectly. The boutique was quiet, the soft hum of instrumental music filling the space. Ethan sat on a small couch nearby, his sketchpad in his lap, his expression unreadable. She turned to him, smiling. "What do you think, sweetheart?" Ethan's gaze lifted briefly from his drawing. "You look pretty." His voice was polite, careful, but there was no joy in it. Before Olivia could respond, Ryan's voice cut through the space. "Ethan," he said, his tone crisp, controlled. "Sit up straight. You're slouching." Ethan's back snapped straight immediately. His fingers tightened around the edges of his sketch pad. Olivia turned, her brow furrowing. "Ryan, it's just a dress fitting." Ryan smiled, easy, effortless. "Of course, just teaching a little posture." Ethan didn't move. He didn't look at Ryan. He just kept his eyes on his lap, his shoulders drawn tight. Something inside Olivia shifted, cold and sharp. That night, as she tucked Ethan into bed, she sat beside him, brushing his hair back like she had done since he was a baby. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "do you want to tell me what's bothering you?" Nathaniel hesitated. Then, finally, his voice barely above a whisper, Do we have to live with him? The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She swallowed. Why do you ask? Ethan's fingers twisted into the blanket. I like it when it's just us. Olivia's chest ached. She cupped his cheek, her thumb brushing lightly across his skin. No one will ever replace your dad, baby. And you'll always have me, no matter what. Ethan's lips pressed together. He didn't argue. But as his eyes closed, his face turned away from hers. Olivia felt something inside her crack. The next morning, she woke to the sound of Ethan in the living room, his pencil scratching against paper. She patted over, rubbing sleep from her eyes. What are you working on? Ethan hesitated. Then he turned the sketchbook around. It was another drawing of Ryan. But this time, Ryan's face was hollow, his eyes dark, empty. And beside him, barely visible in the background, was Ethan. Small, distant, alone. Olivia's breath caught. Ethan! He looked at her, his expression unreadable. It's just a drawing. But Olivia knew better. She stared at the sketch for a long time, something ice-cold settling in her gut. Then, gently, she closed the sketchbook. We're going to be late for school, she said softly. Ethan nodded, tucking the book under his arm. He didn't say anything else. And neither did Olivia. Not yet. The wedding day arrived with an air of perfection. The venue, a sprawling estate nestled in the hills, looked like something out of a dream. Rows of gold chairs lined the garden, silk runners stretched down the aisle, and a canopy of twinkling lights hung above the altar. Everything gleamed with an elegance that had Ryan's signature all over it. Olivia stood in the bridal suite, her wedding gown cascading around her like a cloud of lace and satin. She was supposed to feel excitement, joy. Instead, there was a weight in her chest, something heavy and unshakable. She glanced toward the couch where Ethan sat, dressed in a small black suit. He looked older, too polished, too stiff. He should have been fidgeting, complaining about the tie. Instead, he was quiet, his fingers tracing invisible patterns on the armrest. Olivia smiled, trying to infuse her voice with warmth. You look so grown up, baby. Like a star. Ethan looked at her, his eyes flicking to her dress, then back up to her face. His voice was barely a whisper. You look like a queen. But there was no warmth in his words. No joy. Just observation. Something in her cracked. She knelt in front of him, gathering his small hands in hers. Are you okay, sweetheart? Ethan hesitated, his lips parted, then closed. Finally, he whispered, Do we have to live with him? The air left Olivia's lungs. Her fingers squeezed his gently. Ethan? His voice was small, urgent. Mom, please. Do we have to? The knock at the door made her jump. A wedding coordinator's voice followed. 5 minutes, Mrs. Carter. Mrs. Carter. The name tasted foreign, wrong. She swallowed hard and forced a smile. It's going to be okay, baby. No matter what happens. You'll always have me. Ethan's gaze lingered on her for a moment, searching, before he nodded. But when he looked away, she saw it. That flicker of something distant, something slipping away. The ceremony unfolded in slow motion. She walked down the aisle, the murmurs of guests blending into a soft hum. Ryan stood at the altar, tall and composed, his black tuxedo immaculate. He smiled as she approached, and it was a perfect smile, practiced and precise. Her heart pounded, but not from nerves. The officiant's voice carried through the air, smooth and efficient. If anyone has any objections, speak now, or forever hold your peace. Silence. But inside, something in Olivia screamed. She felt it, this moment, this choice, solidifying around her like a cage. Her eyes flickered to the front row. Ethan sat there, his small legs swinging slightly beneath his chair, his face tight, watchful. The moment passed. She said the vows. Ryan slid the ring onto her finger, and when she placed his on his hand, his grip felt too firm, too possessive. Then the kiss. Soft, fleeting, hollow. Applause. Cheers. The world swam around her, and Olivia led it. The reception was a glittering spectacle. Champagne flowed, polished laughter filled the grand ballroom, and the air buzzed with celebration. Olivia moved through it like a ghost, smiling when expected, nodding when spoken to. She caught sight of Ethan near the dessert table, his small figure barely reaching the spread of cakes and pastries. He reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of a plate. Then, a sharp crack. A plate slipped from his grasp, shattering against the marble floor. The room went still. For a single breathless second, nothing moved. Then, Ryan's voice sliced through the silence. Ethan. Cold. Low. Controlled. Olivia's breath stopped. Her son stood frozen, his eyes wide, his hands trembling. How many times, Ryan continued, his voice soft but razor-sharp, have I told you to be careful? Olivia's feet moved before her mind caught up. But Ryan was faster. The slap echoed. The sound shattered something inside Olivia. Ethan stumbled back a step, his hand flying to his cheek, his face twisting with shock and something worse. Betrayal. Fear. The red mark bloomed fast on his small face. The room gasped. Everything blurred. The guests. The whispers. The music cutting off mid-note. Olivia didn't hear any of it. She saw only her son, her baby, and Ryan's hand. Her body moved, heels clicking against the floor, cutting through the thick, horrified silence. She reached Ethan first. Her hands cupped his face, her thumb brushing over the heat rising on his cheek. Her voice, shaking, filled the room. You. She rose to her feet, turning to Ryan. Her voice was low, steady. You hit my child. Ryan's face shifted. A flicker of something. Surprise, annoyance, but not regret. His voice was smooth, effortless. He was being careless. He needs discipline. Something inside Olivia snapped. No. The word was sharp, raw. Ryan's eyes darkened. Olivia, don't make a scene. She cut him off, her voice slicing through his like a blade. You are the scene. A hush fell over the crowd. She could feel their eyes, the tension, the horror, but she didn't care. I see you now, she whispered. You hide behind a polished mask, but I see you. Ryan's expression flickered, control slipping. Olivia, you don't deserve to be my husband. Her voice rose, shaking but firm. And you sure as hell don't deserve to be anywhere near my child. A ripple of gasps. Ryan's face tightened, his jaw clenching. The perfect mask was cracking. Camille. She didn't let him finish. She turned, gathering Ethan into her arms. She pressed a kiss to his hair, whispering, Come on, baby. We're done here. Then she walked, through the sea of stunned faces, through the whispers and the stares, through the wreckage of the life she had almost walked into. Ethan clung to her, his small fingers grasping the fabric of her dress. Behind her, the wedding, the future Ryan had built for them, collapsed. Ahead, there was something else. There was air. There was freedom. There was them. The night air was cold as Olivia pushed through the towering iron gates of the estate. Ethan's arms were tight around her neck, his breath warm against her shoulder. His small, broken sobs tore at her. She knelt beneath an old oak tree, her gown pooling around her knees. She cupped his face, her fingers trembling. "Are you okay, baby?" Ethan's lower lip wobbled. His voice was so soft she almost missed it. "It just stings a little." Olivia's chest cracked open. She pulled him into her arms, holding him tight. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, baby." Ethan clung to her. His voice was muffled, small, breaking. "I didn't mean to make him mad." Olivia froze. Something inside her turned to ice. She pulled back, looking into his tear-streaked face. "No," she said, her voice burning. "You didn't do anything wrong, nothing. You hear me?" Ethan nodded, but she saw it, that doubt, that hesitation. Footsteps sounded behind them. Olivia's body went rigid, her arms tightening around Ethan. She turned sharply, her heart pounding. "Ryan." "No." "Nicole." Her best friend, her face pale and tight with horror. She reached them in seconds, crouching beside Olivia. Her voice was thick with restrained fury. "Did he?" Olivia's throat closed. She forced the words out, each one sharp, ragged. "Hit my baby?" Nicole inhaled sharply. Then, with quiet, deadly calm, she said, "Let's get you both out of here." Olivia nodded. She stood, Ethan in her arms. She didn't look back. Not once. The car ride was silent, except for Ethan's small, uneven breaths as he clung to Olivia's side in the back seat. Nicole drove with a grip so tight on the steering wheel that her knuckles turned white. The city lights blurred past them, streaks of gold and silver against the darkness, but Olivia barely saw them. Her mind was still back there, back in that grand ballroom, back in that terrible moment when Ryan's hand had struck Ethan's face, when everything she had ignored, excused, and pushed aside had come crashing down in an instant. She had let this happen. The thought clawed at her, sinking deep. Ethan's body was small and warm against her, but he trembled every now and then, the occasional shaky inhale making Olivia tighten her hold on him. She kissed the top of his head. "We're safe now," she whispered. Ethan didn't answer. He only burrowed closer. Nicole pulled up in front of Olivia's apartment and shifted into park, but she didn't move. She turned in her seat, eyes sharp with a quiet, simmering rage. "Do you want me to stay?" Olivia hesitated. She wanted to say yes. She wanted someone else to be here, to hold some of the weight crushing her chest. But she had to do this. She shook her head. "You've done enough. More than enough." Nicole's gaze softened, but her voice was firm. "I mean it, Liv. If he comes near you—" "He won't," Olivia interrupted, but her voice wavered. Nicole stared at her a beat longer, then nodded. "Call me if you need anything, and first thing tomorrow, we go to the police." Olivia swallowed and nodded. She carried Ethan inside, locking the door behind them. Once, twice, for her heart more than for security. She set Ethan down gently on the couch, pulling a blanket over him. His small hand reached out, clutching the fabric of her dress before she could move away. "Is he going to come here?" he whispered. The fear in his voice shattered her. She knelt beside him, brushing his curls back, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. No, baby. He's never coming near you again. Ethan studied her face for a long moment. Then, finally, he exhaled. Okay. That single word, so small, so fragile, made Olivia's throat tighten. She stayed there long after he had fallen asleep, his breath finally even, his body curled under the blanket. The weight on her chest didn't ease. She had to act. Her phone was on the coffee table. She picked it up, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through her contacts. Nicole had sent the number earlier that night. Ana Rodriguez, family law attorney. Olivia hesitated for only a second before pressing the call button. It rang twice before a smooth, professional voice answered. Ana Rodriguez speaking. Olivia's voice was tight, controlled, but the cracks beneath it were raw. My name is Olivia Carter. I need a restraining order. Immediately. There was a brief pause, then Anna's voice softened, though it remained steady. Okay, Miss Carter, let's start from the beginning. And Olivia told her everything. She told her how Ryan had come into their lives, how she had ignored the small signs, how she had convinced herself that his coldness toward Ethan was just an adjustment phase. She told her about the lake house, the strict corrections, the tension Ethan carried whenever Ryan was near. She told her about the wedding, about the slap, about the mark on her son's cheek. When she was done, her voice was hoarse, her breath uneven. Anna was silent for a moment. Then she said, I'm so sorry you and your son went through this. The good news is that you're taking action immediately. Given the public nature of what happened, and if there's video evidence, we can move quickly. I'll file for a temporary restraining order today. It will keep him away from both you and your son while we pursue something permanent. Olivia's grip on her phone tightened. Do it. Consider it done, Anna said, her voice firm. And if he tries to contact you, document everything, every call, every message. If he shows up, call the police immediately. You're not alone in this, Miss Carter. For the first time since she had walked out of that ballroom, Olivia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. When she hung up, the weight in her chest didn't disappear, but it shifted. The next morning, the temporary restraining order was in place. But Ryan didn't stay silent. The first text came before noon. You're making a mistake, Olivia. Let's talk. Don't ruin everything over one moment. She stared at the message, her stomach twisting. Then another. You embarrass me. You don't understand what you're doing. Fix this. Her pulse pounded. Then, minutes later, an unknown number called. The voicemail was his voice, low, tight, coiled with something sharp. You think you're safe from me? You're not. You'll regret this. Olivia shivered, but her hand was steady as she saved the recording and sent it directly to Anna. That night, she locked every door. Ethan stayed close to her on the couch, curled against her like he used to when he was younger. The fear lingered, but so did something else. Resolve. The next morning, Olivia met Anna in person. The lawyer was just as sharp as her voice had suggested. Dark hair pinned neatly back, eyes that missed nothing. We'll move for a permanent order of protection, Anna said, flipping through the stack of collected evidence. The video from the wedding, the threats, his contact attempts, it all strengthened her case. But won't be able to come near you or Ethan. Olivia's voice was edged with something fierce. I don't just want distance. I want him gone from our lives. Anna met her gaze. And that's exactly what we'll get. The days that followed were a blur of legal motions and hearings. The video of the slap spread like wildfire. News articles, social media outrage. Some of Ryan's colleagues tried to defend him. It was just a moment of frustration, but they were drowned out by the footage, by the undeniable truth. Ryan's lawyer reached out with offers, apologies, settlements. Olivia refused them all. And then, silence. No more calls, no more texts. But the quiet didn't feel like peace. It felt like the edge of a blade waiting to fall. Then the court date arrived. Ryan was there. He sat at the defendant's table, his face impassive, his suit crisp. But his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, burned with something dark. Olivia didn't waver. She told the judge everything. Every detail, every warning sign, every bruise, seen and unseen. Ethan sat beside her, his small hand gripping hers under the table. Ryan's lawyer argued. It was an accident. A misunderstanding, a single moment. But the video played. The courtroom was silent, except for the crack of Ryan's palm against Ethan's cheek. The ruling came swiftly. A permanent restraining order was granted. Ryan could never come near them again. Olivia let out a breath, her body sagging with the weight of everything she had carried. As they stepped outside, Ethan looked up at her. "Is he gone now?" he asked softly. Olivia's voice was hoarse but sure. "Yes, baby, he's gone." Ethan's small, relieved breath broke something inside her. She knelt, gathering him into her arms. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt it. Safety. The fight was over. They had won. Not without cost. Not without scars. But they had won. And that was everything. The courthouse steps felt colder than the wind slicing through Olivia's coat. The ruling had been swift, the judge's decision final. Permanent restraining order granted. Ryan Holloway was legally forbidden from coming near her or Ethan ever again. And yet, as Olivia stood outside the courthouse, Ethan's small hand clutched in hers, she felt no triumph. Not yet. It was over, but it didn't feel like it. Not with the memory of Ryan's eyes searing into her from across the courtroom, dark and unreadable. Not with the way his lawyer had fought to soften the reality of what had happened. It was a single moment, a lapse in judgment. He's a respected man, a provider, a mentor. None of it mattered. The slap had been real. The fear in Ethan's eyes had been real. And now, this cold, unsettled feeling twisting in her gut was real too. "Mom?" Ethan's voice was small. "Can we go home now?" Olivia inhaled deeply, pushing down the tremor in her hands. "Yeah, baby, let's go home." Nicole was waiting by the car, arms crossed, her expression a mix of relief and barely contained fury. "That bastard actually thought he could win," she muttered, as Olivia and Ethan reached her. Olivia sighed, rubbing Ethan's back as he climbed into the back seat. He thought his money could make this disappear. Nicole scoffed, pulling the car door shut. Not this time. The drive back was quiet. Olivia leaned her head against the window, exhaustion pressing down on her. The fight had drained her. Mentally, physically, in ways she hadn't even processed yet. But it was done. It had to be done. Ethan dozed off somewhere along the way, his head resting against the seatbelt. Olivia watched him in the rearview mirror, her heart aching at the faint mark still visible on his cheek. It had faded, but it would never be gone. Not really. When they reached the apartment, Olivia carried Ethan inside, tucking him into bed. He stirred, blinking up at her. Is he really gone? She brushed a curl from his forehead, forcing a smile. Yes, sweetheart, he's gone. Ethan exhaled, his small body relaxing for the first time in what felt like forever. And for the first time, Olivia wanted to believe it. The next few days passed in a blur of adjustments. Olivia had expected relief, a weight lifted, but what settled in its place was uncertainty. She found herself checking the locks more than usual, double-checking the windows, glancing over her shoulder when she left the apartment. She told herself it was just habit, that the fear would fade with time. But at night, when Ethan curled beside her on the couch, Olivia stared at the ceiling, her mind replaying every warning sign she had ignored. The way Ryan had subtly rewritten their story, the way he had convinced her she was the problem whenever she questioned him, the way he had made her doubt the only person who had been telling her the truth all along, Ethan. She wouldn't make that mistake again. One evening, Nicole stopped by, a bottle of wine in one hand and a knowing look in her eyes. "Are we celebrating?" Olivia asked as she led her in. "We're processing," Nicole corrected, setting the wine down, "and then celebrating, preferably with an unhealthy amount of carbs." Olivia huffed a quiet laugh. "I don't know if I'm ready for celebrating." Nicole studied her. "You're still scared." Olivia didn't deny it. Nicole sighed, leaning against the counter. "Liv, you won. You did what you had to do. He can't touch you anymore." "I know," Olivia admitted. "But—" Nicole waited. Olivia swallowed, lowering her voice. "What if that's not enough?" Nicole's jaw tightened. "Then we make sure it is." The call came 2 nights later. Olivia's phone vibrated against the kitchen counter. The number, unknown. Her stomach twisted. She shouldn't answer. Don't engage. That's what Anna had told her. But her fingers moved before she could stop them. She pressed the phone to her ear. Silence. Then, a low, measured voice. "You think this is over?" Every muscle in Olivia's body locked. Her knuckles went white around the phone. "Right. I warned you, Olivia." His voice was smooth, controlled, like he wasn't making a threat, just stating a fact. "You should have thought this through." Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. "Don't call me again." A quiet chuckle. "You're emotional, acting on impulse. That's why you always make such poor decisions." Her grip on the phone tightened. "Stay away from us." Another pause. Then his voice dropped lower. "Do you really think a piece of paper will stop me?" Olivia's breath hitched. The line went dead. Her hands shook as she lowered the phone. For a moment she just stood there, staring at the screen, her pulse racing. Then she grabbed her keys. Nicole was at her apartment within minutes, eyes wide with alarm as she opened the door. "Liv?" "He called me," Olivia interrupted, her voice shaking. "He said it's not over." Nicole swore under her breath. "You're calling the police. I need to talk to Anna first." Olivia's voice was firm, but her hands trembled. Nicole reached out, squeezing them. "We'll figure this out." The next morning, Olivia sat across from Anna in her office. The lawyer's face was impassive, but her eyes were sharp. "Who called you directly?" "Yes," Olivia nodded, her stomach twisting as she repeated his words. Anna was silent for a moment, then she leaned forward. He just made a mistake. Olivia frowned. What do you mean? Anna tapped her pen against her desk. With the restraining order in place, any direct contact is a violation, a criminal offense. A slow realization settled over Olivia. He had been so sure he was untouchable. But this changed everything. What do we do? Anna's expression hardened. We build a case. Ryan didn't expect to see the police at his office. He certainly didn't expect to be arrested. When the officers arrived, his expression didn't falter, not at first. Gentlemen, he greeted smoothly. Is there a misunderstanding? The officer barely looked at him. Ryan Holloway, you're under arrest for violating a court-ordered restraining order. For the first time, something flickered in Ryan's carefully controlled mask. What? His hands were pulled behind his back, cuffs clicked into place. You have the right to remain silent. Ryan's voice darkened. This is ridiculous. The officers didn't respond. As he was led outside, cameras flashed. News traveled fast. The polished businessman, the philanthropist, the abuser. It was all unraveling. And this time, Olivia wasn't the one crumbling. She watched the footage from home. Ethan curled beside her, Nicole on the other side. Ryan's face was plastered across the screen, his arrest making headlines. Her phone vibrated. Anna's name. She answered. It's done, Anna said simply. This isn't going away for him. Olivia exhaled slowly, letting the words sink in. It was done. Ryan was gone. For real this time. Beside her, Ethan looked up. His voice was small but steady. We're really safe now? Olivia pulled him close, pressing a kiss to his forehead. Yes, baby, she whispered. We're safe. And for the first time, she truly believed it. The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting a golden glow over the apartment. The air was still, the kind of quiet that felt new, almost foreign. Olivia sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had long gone cold. She hadn't taken a sip in over 20 minutes. Not because she was afraid, because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't. The news had spread quickly. Ryan Holloway, arrested for violating a restraining order. He was facing legal action, his reputation in ruins. The once polished businessman, the man who had built an empire on charm and manipulation, had finally been seen for what he was. And he was gone. Not just legally, not just physically, but gone in a way that mattered. The kind of gone that meant Olivia no longer flinched at every unknown number that called. The kind of gone that meant Ethan could sleep through the night without waking up in a cold sweat. The kind of gone that meant freedom. Olivia exhaled, her fingers loosening around the mug. She let herself breathe. From the living room, the soft rustling of blankets caught her attention. Ethan. She turned, watching as her son slowly sat up on the couch, blinking against the morning light. His curls were a mess, his face creased from sleep. But there was something different in his posture. Something lighter. Something safe. She stood and made her way to him, crouching beside the couch. Good morning, baby. Ethan rubbed his eyes, looking up at her. His voice was thick with sleep, but held a weight of something new. Morning, Mom. It wasn't just a greeting. It was a beginning. Olivia reached out, smoothing his hair back. How do you feel? Ethan was quiet for a moment, as if testing his own emotions. Then he whispered, "Better." A lump formed in Olivia's throat. She nodded, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Me too." The day unfolded slowly, peacefully. They made pancakes together, Ethan carefully flipping them, his tongue peeking out in concentration. Olivia supervised, watching as he laughed, an easy, unguarded sound that she hadn't heard in so long. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen. A message from Anna. "The order is official. He can't come near you or Ethan. If he tries, we'll handle it. You're safe." The words sat in Olivia's chest, fragile and unfamiliar, but solid. She typed out a simple response. "Thank you." She set the phone down and looked at Ethan, who was now sitting by the window with his sketchpad, his pencil moving lightly across the page. Curious, Olivia walked over. "What are you working on, sweetheart?" Ethan smiled softly, his eyes still focused on the drawing. "Just something new." She tilted her head, peering at the paper. It was a sketch of them. Two figures, Olivia and Ethan, standing hand in hand beneath a wide, bright sky. No shadows, no cold edges, just warmth. Her throat tightened, but this time it wasn't from fear. She ran a gentle hand over his curls. "It's beautiful." The doorbell rang. For a split second her body tensed, an old instinct, a memory of fear. But then Ethan slipped his small fingers into hers. "It's okay, Mom," he said softly. "We're safe." The words settled deep, wrapping around her like a promise. She squeezed his hand gently, then stood, checking the peephole. "Nicole." The door swung open, and Nicole immediately pulled Olivia into a tight hug. "Hey, warrior," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. Olivia exhaled, melting into the embrace. "Hey." Nicole pulled back, eyes scanning her face. "How are you?" For the first time, Olivia didn't have to lie. She didn't have to say, "I'm fine," when she wasn't. She didn't have to pretend. She was fine. She was free. She smiled, something real curling at the edges of her lips. "I'm breathing," she said simply. Nicole's eyes flicked past her, landing on Ethan, who waved from his spot by the window. "And how's my favorite artist?" Ethan grinned. "Drawing. Want to see?" Nicole crossed the room, leaning over his shoulder. She studied the sketch, nodding thoughtfully. "You've got real talent, kid. Maybe I'll commission something for my office." Ethan giggled. "I charge a lot." Nicole gasped dramatically, pressing a hand to her chest. "A little entrepreneur? I'll have to negotiate hard." The warmth in the room filled Olivia in a way she hadn't expected. The cracks in her heart, the ones Ryan had left behind, were knitting back together, piece by piece. Nicole turned back to Olivia, leaning against the counter. "So, what's next for you two?" Olivia glanced down at her hand, at the empty place where Ryan's ring had once been. She felt no loss, only relief, only freedom. She met Nicole's gaze, her voice steady. "Next is ours, me and Ethan. No shadows, no fear, just life." Nicole's smile was bright and proud. "Then let's make it a damn good one." That evening, when the sky turned soft and dusky, Olivia and Ethan sat together on the small balcony. The city murmured quietly around them. The air smelled of spring, fresh and full of promise. Ethan nestled against her side, staring up at the sky. After a long moment, his voice broke the silence. Will he ever come back? Olivia didn't hesitate. Her arms tightened around him, her voice unshakable. No, baby, he won't. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice so small yet so certain, he whispered, I believe you. The last of the day slipped beyond the horizon, and the stars blinked into the sky, one by one. It was... Olivia felt the cool air brush against her skin, felt Ethan's warmth beside her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt peace. No more looking over her shoulder, no more second-guessing, no more waiting for the other shoe to drop. The fight was over, and they had won. Not without scars, not without cost, but they had won, and that was everything. Beside her, Ethan's fingers slipped into her hand, small but strong, and together they sat beneath the endless sky, their hearts steady, their bond unbreakable, free. Thank you for staying until the very end of this story. It wasn't just a story. It was a lesson about trust, about listening to the ones who matter most, and about finding the strength to walk away from something that no longer serves you. Olivia's journey wasn't easy. She ignored the warnings, doubted her own instincts, and almost lost herself in the process. But when it mattered most, she chose to see the truth. She chose to fight for the one person who depended on her the most, her son. If this story teaches us anything, it's that love should never come with fear, that control and manipulation are not love, that sometimes the hardest decision is the one that saves us. Where are you watching from? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever ignored a red flag, only to realize later that your instincts were right all along? And most importantly, don't forget to subscribe. There are many more powerful stories to come, and I'd love for you to be part of this journey. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Thank you for being here. Stay safe, stay strong, and always trust your instincts.